when a narcissist reaches out after silence. Do this instead. And I want to start with the instead, because the instead is the entire point of this episode, and the word that separates what we are about to discuss from every other piece of advice available on this specific situation. Because advice about what to do when a narcissist reaches out after silence is extraordinarily abundant. It is one of the most searched, most discussed, most content-generated topics in the entire space of narcissistic abuse recovery. And the advice that most of that content offers is some variation of one of two positions. The first position is the firm boundary position. Do not respond, maintain no contact, stay strong, protect your peace, do not let them back in. This advice is not wrong. In many cases it is exactly right, but it is delivered in a way that treats the decision as simple, as a matter of sufficient willpower and sufficient clarity, as something that a person with adequate self-respect and adequate understanding of what the relationship was will find straightforward to execute. And the people who have actually been in significant narcissistic relationships and are actually receiving the contact after the silence know that straightforward is not what it feels like. The second position is the processing position. Take time to think about what you want. Consider whether you are in a different place now. Evaluate whether the narcissist has genuinely changed. This advice is also not entirely wrong, but it is delivered in a way that treats the decision as one that your feelings and your assessment of the situation are equipped to make clearly, without the framework that would allow you to understand what the contact actually is before you decide how to respond to it. And without that framework, the processing leads not to clarity but to the specific confusion that the contact was designed to produce. What this episode is going to give you is something different from either of those positions. It is going to give you the instead. Not what to do in the sense of the specific behavioral response that will protect you best. What to do in the sense of the internal orientation, the specific quality of understanding and presence that makes whatever behavioral response you choose genuinely yours rather than a reaction to something you have not fully understood. That instead is more useful than either of the two standard positions. And it is available to you right now, in whatever state you are in when the contact arrives. So stay with me. Let's start with what is actually happening in your nervous system when the narcissist's contact arrives, because this is the part of the experience that the standard advice almost entirely skips, and that is, in practice, the most important thing to understand before any decision about how to respond is made. Because the decision about how to respond is not being made by your clear, grounded, fully informed conscious mind in the moment the contact arrives. It is being made by a nervous system that has been significantly shaped by the relationship, that carries the relationship's imprint in its threat responses, its attachment patterns, its specific calibrations of what this person's contact means and what it requires of you. And the nervous system that is making the decision in that first moment is not the same nervous system that will be making it after the specific understanding this episode is going to provide has been fully received. So the first part of the instead is not a behavioral instruction. It is a pause. Not the pause of someone who is deciding whether to respond. The pause of someone who is recognizing that the nervous system's first response to the contact is information about the relationship's imprint, rather than information about the right choice, and that information deserves to be observed before it is acted on. The nervous system's first response to the narcissist's contact after silence is almost always one of a small number of recognizable states, and identifying which state is present in your experience is the first step of the instead. The first state is the pull, the specific, visceral, not entirely explainable draw toward the contact, toward responding, toward the warmth of the connection that the contact is activating the memory of. The pull is real. It is not weakness. It is not failure. It is the nervous system recognizing the signature of something it was attached to and producing the response that attachment produces in the presence of its object. The pull does not tell you whether to respond. It tells you that the attachment is still present in some form. That information is useful. It is not instruction. The second state is the alarm, the specific quality of heightened alertness that some people experience when the narcissist's contact arrives, the immediate activation of a part of the nervous system that has learned, through the specific conditioning of the relationship, that this person's contact requires vigilance. The alarm is also real. It is also not a verdict. It is the nervous system applying what it learned during the relationship to the current situation, which is appropriate, given what the current situation actually is, but which also requires conscious evaluation before it is allowed to determine the response. The alarm does not tell you to refuse contact. It tells you that the relationship left an imprint of danger on the nervous system, and that the nervous system is applying that imprint to this moment. that information is also useful. It is also not instruction. The third state is the most complex and the least talked about, and it is the state that produces the most confusion because it contains elements of both of the first two states simultaneously. It is the ambivalence. The simultaneous pull and alarm, the specific quality of being drawn toward and cautious of the same thing at the same time, the experience of part of you wanting to respond and part of you knowing better and neither part being able to fully override the other. The ambivalence is not confusion. It is the accurate simultaneous registration of everything the relationship was, the genuine connection that was real on your side and that the pull is responding to, and the genuine damage that was also real and that the alarm is responding to. Both are accurate. Neither is the complete picture. And the instead begins, in all three of these states, in the same place, with the recognition that whatever state the nervous system is in, the nervous system's response to the contact is the response to the imprint of the relationship. And the imprint of the relationship is not the same thing as accurate information about the current situation. Now let's talk about what the narcissist's contact after silence actually is, because the understanding of this is the foundation of everything else the instead requires. The contact after silence is not what it presents itself as. It almost never arrives labeled as what it actually is, a supply-seeking maneuver activated by a specific set of circumstances in the narcissist supply economy that we have discussed in previous episodes in this space. It arrives labeled as something else, as a genuine reconnection impulse, as a reaching that is motivated by something real and personal, rather than by the supply economics that are actually driving it, sometimes as an apology, sometimes as a casual, apparently spontaneous reaching out that is framed as nothing significant. Just thinking of you, just saw something that reminded me of you, just wanted to check in. Sometimes as an urgent, emotionally weighted contact that presents itself as the narcissist, having arrived at some important recognition that they need to share with you specifically. All of these presentations have one thing in common that distinguishes them from the genuine reconnection impulses they are mimicking. They are timed. They are not random. They occur in the specific window that the narcissist's monitoring of your situation has identified as the window in which contact is most likely to produce the result the supply economics have identified as desirable. They occur when you are doing better, as we discussed in the previous episode. They occur when the narcissist's current supply is in a declining phase. They occur when the specific comparison between what you provided and what the current supply is providing has tipped far enough in your favor that the investment of contact has become supply economically rational. The timing is the tell, and the instead includes, as a foundational element, the practice of reading the timing before reading the content. Before engaging with what the contact says, before evaluating whether the apology is genuine, or the casual reaching is something more significant, or the urgent recognition is something that deserves a response. Before any of that, the instead asks you to ask one question about the timing. What has changed in the narcissist's supply situation that makes this the moment for contact? Not what has changed in your situation that makes you available for contact, though that question is also relevant and we will get to it. What has changed in the narcissist situation? And if the honest answer to that question is I do not know what has changed in their situation, the instead asks you to hold the contact in a specific way while you find out. Not respond. Not refuse to respond. Hold. Hold in the specific quality of someone who has received something and is not yet ready to do anything with it, because the information required to do something useful with it is not yet fully available. The holding is the most important and the most counterintuitive part of the instead, because the holding feels passive and the situation feels like it requires action. Requires either the response that maintains or restores the connection, or the refusal that demonstrates the boundary and protects the peace. Both of these feel like something. The holding feels like nothing. But the holding is not nothing. The holding is the specific, active, psychologically sophisticated practice of refusing to let the urgency that the contact generates, the urgency that is itself one of the contact's most effective features, the quality that makes delay feel impossible, and the immediate response feel necessary. Refusing to let that urgency be the thing that determines the timing of whatever response eventually comes, because the urgency is designed. It is one of the contact's most consistent structural features, and it is designed to do exactly what urgency always does in the narcissist's toolkit. To bypass the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for the long-term pattern recognition and the considered judgment that would see the contact most clearly, and activate the limbic system, the part responsible for the immediate emotional response that the contact was calibrated to produce. The holding defeats the urgency. The holding says, to the urgency and to the nervous system that is generating it and to the contact that produced it, not yet. Not because the response is being withheld as a power play. Because the response, when it comes, is going to come from a place that has had enough time to receive the full understanding of what the contact actually is before it decides what to do with that understanding. And that understanding, complete, grounded, not rushed by the urgency the contact was designed to produce, is what makes the response genuinely yours rather than the reaction the contact was designed to elicit. That is the first part of the instead. And the parts that follow, the specific practices that fill the holding with something more useful than waiting, and the specific things to look for in the contact itself that tell you what you are actually dealing with, and the specific qualities of the response when it finally comes from the fully informed place the holding creates. That is exactly where we are going next. The practices that fill the holding with something more useful than waiting are not complicated, but they require a specific quality of honesty with yourself that is harder than it sounds in the particular emotional state that the narcissist's contact produces. Because the holding, if it is filled with the wrong things, does not produce the clarity that makes the response genuinely yours. It produces a different kind of confusion. The confusion of someone who is technically not responding but who is psychologically entirely occupied with the contact, running it through every possible interpretation, trying it on in every possible frame, arriving at a different conclusion about what it means and what it deserves in every circuit of the analysis. This is not the holding. This is the rumination that the contact was designed to activate, the specific cognitive occupation that keeps you oriented toward the narcissist and toward the question of the contact rather than toward the grounded, self-referencing clarity that the genuinely useful holding produces. The genuinely useful holding is not occupied with the contact. It is occupied with you, with the specific, honest, self-referencing inventory of where you actually are, not where you were in the relationship, not where the contact's arrival has temporarily returned you to, but where you have actually gotten to in the time between the ending and the contact's arrival. The first practice of the useful holding is this inventory, and it is specific enough to be done with genuine precision rather than the vague, easily distorted sense of how I am doing that the emotional state the contact produces typically substitutes for it. The inventory asks several questions that deserve specific, honest answers rather than the answers that feel protective in the moment. The first question is, in the period immediately before this contact arrived, before the contact was in my awareness, what was the actual quality of my daily experience? Not the ideal version, not the version that would make the most compelling case for having moved on, but the actual lived, ordinary quality of the days. Were they fuller than they were during the relationship? Was I more present in them? Was the version of myself that was showing up in them more genuinely mine than the version that was showing up during the relationship? The reason this question matters is that it gives you access to the baseline that the contact has temporarily disrupted, the actual state you were in before the contact arrived. And that baseline is the accurate information available about what the contact is actually interrupting. If the baseline was genuinely better than the relationship, fuller, more present, more genuinely yours, then the contact is interrupting something real, and the cost of responding in a way that reorients you toward the narcissist rather than toward what you were building is a cost you can measure specifically. If the baseline was still organized significantly around the relationship, around the processing of it, around the ongoing orientation toward the narcissist, that healing from a narcissistic relationship takes considerable time to genuinely dissolve, then the contact is not interrupting a fully independent life, but a life that is still in the process of becoming independent. And the cost of responding from that place is different and requires a different calculation. The second question of the inventory is the most revealing and the one most consistently skipped, because it is the most uncomfortable. The question is, what do I actually want from responding? Not what responding might produce in the narcissist. Not whether the contact might be genuine. Not whether this time might be different. What do I want from responding? What is the specific outcome that some part of me is hoping the response will produce? And the honest answer to this question, the one that arrives before the more defensible answers that the self-protective mechanisms quickly supply, is the most important information the inventory generates, because the honest answer almost always contains something that the more defensible answers conceal. It contains the specific hope that the contact has activated. The hope that the person who is reaching out is the version of the person who was good in the early stages of the relationship. The hope that the recognition that was always missing during the relationship has finally arrived. The hope that the doing better you have been building is going to be seen and acknowledged, and that the acknowledgement is going to feel like the completion of something that the relationship left incomplete. These hopes are not shameful. They are the honest expression of what was real on your side of the relationship and what the ending left unresolved. But they are hopes about what the response might produce in you rather than accurate assessments of what the contact is capable of producing. And the distinction between those two things, between what you hope the response will give you and what the contact is actually capable of providing, is the specific clarity the inventory is designed to create. Because the contact is not capable of providing most of what the honest answer reveals you are hoping for. The apology you are hoping for, if it arrives, will be the strategic acknowledgement we discussed rather than the genuine accountability that would actually address what the hope is reaching for. The recognition you are hoping for, if it is offered, will be offered in the specific register that makes you most likely to provide the supply the contact was seeking, rather than in the register of someone who has genuinely, at their own cost, arrived at a different understanding of what happened between you and the completion you are hoping for. The resolution of what the relationship left unresolved cannot be provided by the person who created the unresolved quality in the form of a contact that is motivated by supply economics, regardless of how genuine the contact presents itself as being. The inventory is not designed to tell you that your hopes are wrong. It is designed to tell you that the contact is the wrong address for them. And knowing that the contact is the wrong address is the most useful piece of information the holding can produce. The third practice of the useful holding, after the inventory has been completed with the specific honesty it requires, is what I would describe as the reality test of the contact itself. Because the inventory tells you where you are and what you are hoping for, the reality test tells you what the contact actually is. Not what it presents itself as, but what its specific features reveal about its actual nature and motivation. And the reality test is not complicated. It requires the application of a small number of specific questions to the contact itself that consistently produce more accurate information about its nature than any amount of interpretation of its content. The first question of the reality test is the timing question we discussed earlier. What has changed in the narcissist situation that makes this the moment? If you cannot answer this question with specific information, the reality test asks you to note that absence of information and hold it as significant. The second question is the content question. What specifically does the contact ask of you? Not what does it say. What does it ask? Because the contact always asks something, even when it appears to ask nothing, even when it presents itself as a simple reaching out with no expectation of anything specific in return. What it asks is always some version of the same thing. Your attention, your engagement, your willingness to be in interaction with the contact in a way that confirms the channel is open and that you are available to be reached. And identifying what the contact is asking, specifically and without the softening, that the hope of it being genuine tends to apply to the analysis, is the most clarifying thing the reality test produces. The third question of the reality test is the pattern question. What does this contact have in common with every previous contact from this person that arrived after a period of distance or silence? Because this is almost certainly not the first time the narcissist has reached out after silence. There is a pattern. And the pattern, observed across the full history of the relationship and its aftermath rather than only in the specific hopefulness of this particular moment, is the most reliable information available about what this contact is and what it is going to produce if it is received in the way it is designed to be received. When the inventory has been completed honestly and the reality test has been applied specifically, what remains is the decision about the response. And the instead at this stage is not a prescription. It is not a rule about whether to respond or not respond, about what to say or not say, about how long to wait or whether to wait at all. The instead at this stage is a quality. A specific quality of groundedness in the clarity that the holding produced, the clarity of someone who knows where they actually are, who knows what they are actually hoping for, who knows what the contact is actually asking for and what it is and is not capable of providing, and who responds, or does not respond, from that clarity rather from the urgency the contact was designed to produce. The response from clarity might look identical to the response from urgency. The same words, the same timing, the same behavioral expression. But it is not the same response, because it comes from a different place. It comes from a place that has completed the inventory and the reality test and the holding, and that is therefore not being surprised by what the contact is or what the response produces. It comes from a place that is choosing rather than reacting. And that choosing, specific, grounded, informed by the full understanding of what is actually happening, is the instead. It is not a specific action, it is a specific state. The state of someone who has received the contact with enough presence and enough honesty and enough of the specific self-knowledge that the holding creates to respond to what is actually there rather to what hope activated by the contact is reaching for. And the response from that state, whatever form it takes, carries with it the most important quality available in any interaction with a narcissist who has reached out after silence. It carries the quality of not being available to be surprised, of having arrived at the interaction with a clarity that the contact was specifically designed to prevent and that the instead specifically produces, and that clarity, present before the first word of the response is decided, informing every subsequent moment of the interaction, making the narcissist's operational map of you suddenly and significantly less accurate than it was before the holding produced what it produced. That clarity is not just the protection. It is the most complete and most honest expression of the person you have been becoming in the silence before the contact arrived. And bringing that person to the response, fully and without apology, is the most specific and most complete version of the instead that this episode has been building toward from the beginning.